Morning, everybody. I'm Brian Athey, the president of Congressional Capital, and today it is my honor to have Michael Cross, who I've known for years, who's been the architect on several of my own projects and the projects for many of Congressional Capital's borrowers. He's widely considered to be one of the best architects in the city. His zoning knowledge is quite impressive and extensive, thought to be an expert in zoning and code-related matters, and well respected throughout the city. So, Michael, thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Appreciate all of that.
All right. Well, tell me about your background and how you got into architecture. Like, what led you to become an architect, and tell me about your journey to architecture.
Yeah, I guess that's rolling way back. I guess in summary, high school guidance counselor, career advisor, I guess, guided me towards architecture through a combination of successes in both art and some of the maths and sciences.
Are you an art, like a gifted artist? Are you good at art? I mean, do
I
you,
I don't
yeah.
think I'm a gifted artist, but yeah, I've shown some talents in over the years in art.
Do you still do art in any way or no?
No, I think my biggest artistic endeavor these days is photography, which is heavily based on photographing youth sports events. My
Yeah,
my
that's
own
my
my own
photography.
kids.
How many photos do you have saved on your phone? I swear I looked recently and it was like 36,200 and it was like some
Yeah,
insane number. And it's
yeah.
literally like 34,000 of them are of my children, right? So what about your children? Are either of them talented at art?
Yeah, they both have shown interest. My oldest definitely had some early interest and talent. Neither one of them are pursuing it all that heavily at this point.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting how they start doing those kind of things young and it can taper a bit. But so you showed some aptitude as a high schooler and in the math and science and in art, and then your guidance counselor advised you. And so did you study architecture in college?
I did, yeah. So I got an internship in high school with a friend's father who was an architect and enjoyed it and ended up applying to colleges specifically for architecture. Ended up going to the University of Colorado where they have a 4-year program, environmental design, majoring in architecture. And then from there, I did my master's at Columbia, the master's architecture.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize that you went to Boulder. Was that amazing? It was a super fun experience?
Yeah. Yeah, as I say, it was through a series of bad decisions that ended up back here on the East Coast. But
Yeah, totally, right? I mean, you could have lived
yeah,
this like the Boulder lifestyle. You could be skiing every day or every other day in the
that's
wintertime
right.
and hiking and doing all those other things. And now you're in the throbbing metropolis that is Washington, D.C., right?
That's right. Yeah, quite a difference.
All right. And so then how did you start out? How did you get to be doing it on your own? Right now you have your own firm, you have employees, you have all that. Like how did you come to that?
I feel like the way I've explained it before is I felt like I had come very far very fast. I got licensed quite early compared to my peers, and I was working at a regional size firm, a relatively large firm in Richmond, Virginia, that had a lot of different silos doing a lot of different things, but when I looked around after getting licensed, I realized there was a huge gap between where I was and the next level. And that was a gap that at the time to me looked like it was really nothing but age. And so I decided to go out on my own at that time, really with the simple business plan of making mistakes and learning. I was very passionate about sustainable design, had co founded their sustainable design group within that firm. And when I first started out, I was really focused on trying to pursue solely sustainable design.
Okay. And so, like what time period was this? How old were you when you first started out on your own?
I think I was something like 28, 29 years old.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. And so you basically just hung a shingle and went out on your own and started looking for business. Did you take clients from the old firm? How did you like really get started and feel comfortable that you could sort of pay the bills?
That would have all been really smart, but young and dumb, idealistic. I just hung my shingle basically. The impetus. There was a client. There was an impetus to leave. I had been working with a friend of a friend who was a contractor up here in the DC area, doing some sketches for his own house, and he had landed a design build contract for a yoga studio in the DuPont Circle area.
Oh, cool.
And he reached out to me and he said, "I got this design build contract. You want to design?" And the firm I was working with had a strict no moonlighting policy. And so I felt like I had to kind of honor that and make a decision accordingly. So we did a lot of design build together for the first couple of years. This was in 2007. So I often say I quit a very good job just before the Great Recession. In hindsight, it actually worked out very well because I had my feet on the ground just a few months before everybody else was being let go. And we did a lot of design build work together, from 2007 to 2010 or 11. And it was about that time that we got our first multifamily job. And that's really what we've been focusing on ever since.
So the design build stuff you did from seven to 2011 was essentially you and the contractor, that you were working with at the time, and you did the yoga studio and did some other stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, I did other stuff along the way, but that was kind of my core client. And we did a lot of single family residential stuff, a lot of commercial stuff. We did a series of bakeries in the area, that type of stuff.
Oh, cool. Does that contractor still work in Washington? Do you still keep in touch or
Yes.
no?
Yes. Allen Built Inc., really talented builder, does a lot of great high-end residential as well as some other stuff.
Do you do any work for Alan today or no?
Yeah, we still are in touch. We are not working on anything currently.
That's a cool story. That's great. Nice way to kind of get started. So you got your first multifamily job back then. So that was like 2011.
Yeah, that's right. First multifamily unit there, 3 unit conversion. It was largely ground up. It was a structure that was mostly condemned. And so
Hmm.
we basically started with the foundation and went straight up back in place, row house, no cellar. At that time, we were doing the formula was 12 to 1600 square foot, 2 bedroom dens,
I remember that
big,
very well. You were doing
big.
duplex condos?
Those I think were flats just by the
Yeah.
the nature of it, but very big units compared to what we have done since.
I started Congressional Capital in January of 2011, and what a different world it was. The city was coming back from the Great Recession. There was tons of opportunity, lots of upside and room to run. People were kind of starting to do deals again. And for those who took the risk of doing deals, there was great reward. The margins were still really good. There was a bunch of housing stock that needed to be renovated, needed to be redeveloped, et cetera. And so you did that project, and then I assume that led to another one, and another one, and another one.
Yeah, and I think you're familiar, the multifamily developer world is pretty tight knit. And so, yeah, I did a couple more jobs with that particular client, but they talked, and through word of mouth, that's pretty much all we've focused on for the last decade or more.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the largest multifamily project you've ever been a part of? Not, on your own,
Yeah.
not back when you were at a different firm.
Yeah, so I often say that we kind of max out around 5 stories, 50 units. Our largest to date, I think, is a 6 story, 47 unit plus some commercial space. That's a pedestal style construction for us. And I think that's where we start to have that cutoff as we haven't done full concrete and steel buildings. So, and the 50 unit cutoff in DC is just shy of having a loading dock. And so,
Yeah.
I feel like not that a loading dock by itself is all that difficult, but it starts to represent a type of building that has a great deal of other service and amenity spaces that we just haven't had the opportunity to work on to date, primarily focusing on the smaller conversions, which are so prevalent here in the district.
Yeah, that's right. And, what's your favorite part of the process? Like what do you like today, like doing the best from the beginning of the job to the end of the job and everything in between?
I think that maybe the reason that we found ourselves in this market is I feel like I am a little bit of a developer at heart. I like the puzzle. I like to get involved with the zoning up front. As you had mentioned
Hmm.
before, we've spent a lot of time becoming invested in the zoning code here in DC. Obviously, there between the zoning and the building code, we're really kind of cracking the code code on what the highest and best use may be at that site. I enjoy that challenge.
No, I think you're excellent at it. I think your zoning analyses are very good. As some of you may know, Michael and his team will do an analysis of a project on the front end. Say you're going to buy 123 Main Street and the zoning is MU4, it's 4,000 lots, 4,000 square feet. He'll tell you what, sort of your maximum developmental yield is, and sort of like a projection of how many units, what parking is required, et cetera. It's really, really useful on the front end of a project. And, Michael and his team are really knowledgeable, obviously, about zoning, but also the building code, which is immensely helpful throughout the process. So speaking of your team, how many people work for you today?
Obviously, with the interest rates up, our team has shrunk, but currently with five of us, we've been able to maintain a real core group of folks, all of whom have been with us somewhere between 5 and 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredibly valuable. I know multiple members of the team who are also excellent. Are you guys in person or you're remote or you're a hybrid of both? Or, now it's sort of a question of significance because people are
Yeah.
sort of moving back to the office and there's a bit of both things going on.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, right? So we're hybrid, I think, as most people are. We just before the pandemic, we were looking to expand because we were maxed out in our office in DuPont Circle, and we were looking at new spaces because we didn't think we could deal with the downtime of a renovation expansion of our current space. The pandemic hit, we all got sent home and we realized that, well, the office is empty now. Let's talk to the building again about expansion. During the pandemic, we actually grew to 12 people. We had more, at one time, we had more people than we had desks should we have
Yeah.
returned to the office. And so I was committed to keeping my foot on the gas. So we expanded the office to 16 workstations and we returned to work pretty early because we had the space. We were doing a one shift on, one shift off sort of thing so that everybody could be spaced out. But I think as everybody got settled in, the reality kind of took hold that remote work was here to stay in some form. And so over the years, we've never really had everyone return to the office. We've just recently, after 11 years there in DuPont, downsized to a co-working space because only 3 out of the 5 of us come in. 2 are fully remote. One is actually out of state.
Yeah, I mean, I find the in person to be excellent for collaboration, for training, for ideation, all those things. I think that hybrid works really well. I mean, look, the reality of it is, especially in this area, people with traffic and, once people have kids and activities and that kind of thing, it's nice to be able to be like, hey, today I've got to go to 3 kids' baseball games or basketball games or whatever, and I've got this school event. I'm going to work from home, and then people come together on certain days to, talk about, I guess, in your case, what projects you have and who's doing what and
Yeah.
ideate and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was very stubborn on this idea that we only were able to, those of us who went into the pandemic with teams that became fully remote, I think the talk at that time was how productivity was maintaining, rising, all that type of stuff. And I was arguing that I felt that that was because we had built those teams in person and that we wouldn't have
Yeah.
been able to have that same success if we had started from a dead stop, create a remote team and try to have that same success. I still believe that today, but I think I've been proven wrong that there are teams out there that have brought folks on remotely and have trained them and continue to work fully remote, have never seen each other physically. I think for certain industries that's harder.
Yeah.
And I think architecture is still one of those that having a physical presence helps teams communicate because the projects are inherently complex. And so emails, phone calls can only do so much. Having a real-time conversation can be beneficial.
I mean, I've talked anecdotally, I know friends that work at very large companies and that, are more advanced in their careers. And they talk about how they have a lot of younger employees turnover because if they're not in the office, they lack the collegiality. They sort of lack
That's
the,
right.
the loyalty. They're not forming relationships with mentors like I did it when I was a young lawyer. It's much easier to leave a company if there's no personal relationship and you don't feel
Right.
like you have any connection or you're not going to, have a beer with your colleague after work and talk about, what your boss did wrong that day.
I think we've
Yeah.
talked about this before because I think we shared some of those experiences. We started this call with my background and how I had grown, what I felt was pretty far, pretty fast. The reason for that was all of my early work experiences, I was sitting directly beside the principal, literally at a desk, like back to back or side to side. And
Yeah,
so I was not just getting what he was directly feeding me. In this case, always working for men, but I was overhearing the phone
totally.
calls he was having with other
Totally.
clients, and so I was absorbing all of that stuff, which helped me not only perform in the job to know what to expect because I kind of heard it come in, so I know kind of where things are going, but also allowed me to understand what the roles of the next level of management, and responsibility within an architecture firm looked like. And that allowed me to go out on my own very early simply because I had seen it.
Yeah,
So
I think it helps enormously. I often think
yeah,
about like the fact in my office, people overhear me talk and they know I'm working on this or they know my view on that. Even with my kids, my kids are 12, 10, and 6, as you know, and they hear me talk about loans. I was driving on a long drive with one of my sons, and one of my borrowers was having an issue, and I talked to him for a half an hour, giving him advice. It really didn't relate to my business with him at all. And then the same person called me 2 or 3 times when I was in the car with the same son over the weekend. And he said, "Oh, he's calling again," and he had his name. Like they're paying attention to everything. And he asked me
yeah,
2 weeks
yeah.
later what the resolution of the issue I was discussing with the borrower, right? Whether it's your kids or whether it's your staff, people are, listening, learning, and, kind of developing.
That's right. And so I think there is a potential, shortcoming at some point where this next generation, the folks who have been starting employment in this new world, they haven't had potentially that same level of exposure if they've been remote.
Well, yeah, I also think like they're going to, some of those people will start companies and they'll struggle with how to interact with employees and how to, train them in person. And as we all know, hiring is one of the most difficult things in business. And
Right.
so some of that'll be challenging. But yeah, in terms of your firm and the work you're doing day to day, how has that work changed in the past few years, if at all? I mean, it's certainly changed in quantity, I think, but in sort of types of projects, have you seen a change, an evolution, a difference in what people are
Yeah,
focusing on?
Yeah, we have. I guess since the interest rate hike, we have seen a reduction in volume in terms of investment here in DC. And then we've also seen a transition from for market condominiums to properties that are targeting voucher rentals, for that
Yeah.
guaranteed revenue stream. And so, from an architectural perspective, it's not really all that different. Obviously, the spaces are slightly different. The goals of the bedroom sizes and counts are different, but architecturally, it's still the same building overall. But yeah, the goals of our clients have changed.
Yeah, totally. So it's really just the utilization of the building that's changed. It hasn't,
Yeah.
and I guess it's affected certain things in terms of layouts, I assume, and how the units are designed.
Yeah, that's right. We talked about early on in my career, we were doing two-bedroom dens of, pretty significant square feet. There was a period where there was a lot of one bedrooms. One
Yeah.
bedroom den was a huge plus, but a lot of one bedrooms. And now we've come kind of full circle. We're doing a lot of 5 and 6 bedroom units,
Yeah.
targeting a sector of the DC affordable housing market that has been underserved.
Yeah, totally. Family style units and serving the need. There's certainly a need for quality housing for, families in the district. And I think that's where people are headed. So where do you see things going in the next sort of 5 years? I mean, what's your goal? Are you going to try to build some things, be a developer a bit? Or are you going to stick to architecture, do a little bit of both?
Yeah, I think for the purposes of this conversation, I'll stay in my own lane. And,
Yeah, yeah.
and I do hope that we can find that we see a return to increased development here in the district. It does feel like the district has waned a bit in terms of its energy, but as we were talking a little bit before the call, I feel like it's not quite dead yet.
That's how it
There's
feels. It's got some life in it. I mean, I was telling you before that I was on the hill the other night for dinner with a couple friends and went to a great spot at 11th and Penn Pariso. Food was excellent. The energy there and around it was great. So there's some livelihood for sure. Like those of us who are dinosaurs, who have little kids, don't go out very often, so it's hard to tell. But it was refreshing to see Capitol Hill kind of buzzing. And this was a Wednesday night and the food was excellent. It was nice to see a place I hadn't heard of be such a good spot. And so, no, I don't think the city's dead. I think the Commanders' new stadium is going to be great for Hill East and the surrounding areas. And I really think the city, my personal view is the city needs to go real hard in trying to get some major corporations to headquarter there, maybe give them like tax incentives, do other things to get a real commercial buzz too. Because, office to residential is a great thing. I've got a borrower who's doing a bunch of it now, but it sure would be nice to have some more, hardcore employment centers in the city for young people and
That's
otherwise.
right. That's right. I think that we have to recognize that we're building all these condos for people who are moving to DC because they work in DC. That I think that it would be short-sighted to think that they're going to move to DC just for DC itself.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
so I think that the loss of energy is, like you're saying, has really just been that there's just not the critical mass of workforce in the offices during the day in DC to support all these little secondary industries, the restaurants and shops that, used to be the definition of the central business district.
Yeah, it'd be really
Um,
interesting to look at they have the data from like companies like Data Watch, the swipe companies and
yeah,
Castle
right.
that show how many people are sort of coming and going on a percentage of total building utilization now versus, the pandemic versus, 2 years ago. It'd be fascinating to look at that data again. I've looked at it, a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, but, it feels like it's picking up. It's just not near where it was before.
Yeah, I've seen some of that data as well. I think it's depending on where you are in the city, but being boots on the ground in those spaces, I can just tell you that anecdotally that the people still aren't there in the
Yeah.
same numbers that they used to be.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I mean, if you go there in the middle of the day and it's not where it was. So my pitch really is for the DC government to, really unveil some incentives. Like if I was running DC, I'd look at all the major incentives that other major cities in the US and beyond have used to attract employers, attract universities, attract other things that hospital systems, whatever, that really generate employment opportunities and get more people and energy into what's a great city, and try to roll those things out. I don't see them happening myself, and I'm not trying to be overly critical. I just haven't, I read the Washington Post, read the Wall Street Journal. I'm not seeing articles that say, "Gee, Washington has unveiled this new plan to attract
Yeah.
employers." I mean, I see the office to residential, but you're really just going in one direction. There's more units, but why are the people coming? Is it
But
just because
why are
Perry
they
So
there?
at
Right.
11th and Penn is good?
That's right. That's what I'm
So
scared about the office to residential. I don't think it'll ever get this far because the reality is much of the office space in DC is not really eligible for conversion to
yeah,
residential
yeah.
because of the form factors, et cetera. But
You mean even if you mean eligible from a practicality standpoint, like
yeah,
even if
yeah,
they zone it
architecturally
for it.
speaking,
That's
yeah,
I totally agree. I mean, it's
be,
it's not what people think. I mean, people think like it's first of all, it's not going to trade at a low enough number that your land basis is so low that you can go in and gut it and remove all the concrete and steel and all the stuff that's going to be massively expensive to remove
that's
and still
right. I
make the
mean,
math work.
most of those buildings have pretty low ceilings from a residential standpoint. They also have very deep floor plates. So the window to floor area or ratio is very low. And in a residential environment, that has to be really high, first and foremost, just because the code requires a certain amount of natural light in bedrooms and
Yeah,
living rooms and all that. These deep floor plates of many of these more modern buildings, office buildings, just simply don't convert. I think where we see those conversions working well is in the older office
yeah.
buildings that were built pre 70s, and so they relied more on the natural light in their original design, and so they're more eligible for conversion.
Yeah, as I mentioned prior to the call, a friend and borrower of mine who's, I know done work with you is doing a really a beautiful conversion over near Union Station of what was a office building owned by a nonprofit that, he bought and is converting to a bunch of residential units. And, the ceiling heights are great. It actually sets up really well for it. But I think that's a really unique situation. I don't think
Yeah.
that the city is teeming with opportunities like that.
Yeah, and the
And
more we
so,
do that, the less office space there is to, to have the businesses come to employ the folks that we want to buy these residential units. So,
yeah, exactly. So I think we're in agreement on that. So what do you think makes DC a special place? Like, what do you like the best about it?
yeah, I think going back to when we first moved here, I used to describe it I grew up in Richmond. I had moved back to Richmond, but I did so after being in New York City for several years. And so when my wife and I were making those decisions and landing in DC, what we were kind of always noting is it's geographically, kind of the midpoint between Richmond and New York, not
Hmm.
precisely, but roughly. And in terms of like culture and quality of life and stuff, we felt like it was also effectively that same balance.
Yeah.
That at the time that we ended up moving to the district, which was right in that 2011 timeframe, the restaurant scene had really picked up here. There's just a lot of young energy in DC. It offered a lot of the sort of urban cultural amenities, but at a density that was more family friendly.
Totally.
You could have a brownstone and a car in DC, which was hard to achieve in New York.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I took my whole family to New York City, in January for the long weekend. And, it's an incredible place. The energy is like nothing else. The form and structure of the buildings. And, we took the ferry out to the Statue of Liberty and,
Yeah,
and
all right.
the view of the cityscape was incredible. By the way, it was like 20 degrees and windy, but other than that, it was amazing. But, it's such a big, overwhelming, intense place. DC has a lot of the same cultural offerings, the shows and now with the anthem, the live music of a variety of scales. Blues Alley still, I go to that, a couple times a year. Really good restaurants, sporting events, has all those things without being as overwhelming as New York.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I
So
think that at the core of any answer to that, I think that's what I think DC has to offer. It's a very accessible, world-class city.
yeah, I totally agree with you. All right, last question. If there's one thing that DC could do from a zoning standpoint or a building code
Hmm.
standpoint that you think would help make DC a better place, what would it be?
I got a lot of pretty wonky zoning stuff, but globally, I think one of the things that could really change development in DC is something that there are some groups working on, and some traction is gaining on this idea of a single means of egress building serving more than 3 stories. I think what's being advocated is maybe up to six, but in any case, anything
Up to
more than
six
that
stories?
I think is what some of the discussions have been. I
Which would
think
make those buildings massively more efficient, right? In terms of a
that's right.
deliverable space standpoint, like you take the same envelope and you'd really have a much more efficient building, and ultimately it'd probably result in better layouts, a better livable space for people,
That's
et
right. I think
cetera.
the types of projects that we've been focused on over the years are a lot of the infill lots. So, a lot of times even our big properties might still only be 35 feet wide, even if, they've got a lot of 10, 12,000 square feet. The frontage is often only a few row houses wide. And in those types of buildings, you just don't have the same ability to introduce a second stairwell while maintaining a good flow of space from front to rear, noting that the sides are windowless. So again, that window to floor ratio, trying to ensure that we get as much window line per unit as possible. Single means of egress building is hands down one of the most efficient. We do a lot of 4-story buildings as single means of egress by cheating that upper floor as a multi-level unit, which is pushing the building code kind of to its maximum and its current
Yeah.
understanding or enforcement. But if we were allowed to even just do 4 stories, right, which here in DC, even just going to four would change a lot, because the zoning, 4 to 5 stories is kind of the max in a lot of these areas, just based on FAR anyway. So that would be tremendous, and that would allow us to, even in just those simple 4-story buildings where we've got a multi-level unit on the top, that would get 2 to 4 more units out of that upper floor,
Yeah.
which would help from a unit count perspective, if that's the metric that folks are going off of.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Now, who's leading the charge on that? Is there an industry group? Is it's a collection of different people that sort of,
Yeah, I think
yeah,
it's a collection of different folks, including some local architects. But I think maybe the single organizer might be the AIA. I'm
I
not
see.
sure who's exactly behind it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I've talked to various people about over the years is there an effective mechanism whereby small developers, people that are doing the 50 unit or less projects, their architects and other consultants are really, sort of lobbying for sort of proactive measures like what you're describing that are good for themselves and also good for the city. And it's always felt a bit sort of bifurcated or, segmented, I don't know that there's enough of a collective that's effective that really does this.
Yeah, agreed. I have not myself participated in it, so
I haven't
I,
really
I'm
either,
I'm
which
part of the
is
problem, I guess.
I'm part of the problem too. So maybe we should make it a pact to be part of the solution this year. All right. So actually, I do have one other question because I know you like to read, and for those who don't know, Michael reads pretty voraciously, typically. Although we haven't talked about books in a while. What are you reading now? And if nothing, have you read anything good lately that you recommend for
Hmm.
people?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, I guess I finished up a book recently that you had recommended, Limitless
Yeah,
by
James Quick.
Jim Quick or something like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
I thought it was
Uh,
excellent. Yeah,
yeah, I thought it was good. I think I put in a category of those books of you've probably read it before, you probably know most of it, but it's packaged up into a new way that
yeah.
is kind of good to remind you of some of those concepts. I guess most of our conversation goes to business productivity type stuff. The most interesting book I read recently, though, was outside of that. It was Why Buddhism is True, I think is the title. I don't have
I'm
it.
definitely gonna buy that. I'm gonna buy it later today and read it because it
Uh,
sounds very interesting. I took a class on religions of the world in college, and
yeah,
I grew up without religion, and so I gravitated towards Buddhism. And for those of you who are listening, you're probably rolling your eyes and being like, "Seriously, man?" I actually always have liked it and found it deeply interesting. And went to Japan. I was a caddy on the LPGA golf tour, and I had 2 weeks in Japan, one a working week, one an off week, and spent some time in the temples over there and was kind of exploring. So it's called what again?
I think it's called Why Buddhism is True, but it's an interesting one because the author is an evolutionary psychologist, I believe. I think that's what his title is, but he basically approaches this from trying to understand how the human mind or even like animal brains form, how they work. And he's got a strong argument for why, Buddhism really strikes to kind of the truth of how the human brain works at its most basic level. He also gets kind of deep into why he thinks that, as I told my kids one day, he was basically arguing that Buddhism can save the world. But it was really kind of getting to the bigger picture of not just the individual human psyche, but
The collective. Yeah.
humans as a society, and why Buddhism speaks to some of the most fundamental problems there.
Well, we have lots of
And
problems today in the
and
world. So
that I'm blanking on it, but that actually all that reading stems from I have been a daily meditator for a couple years now, all based on a book that you recommended to me that basically at the very end of the book, like in the appendix, he's like, "Oh, and there's this 6 stage meditation that I
oh, you know
do."
what? I
Have you
know the book.
something mind, I think.
Yeah. Code of the Extraordinary Mind, maybe.
That's it. That's right.
Great
Code of
book
the
for if
Extraordinary
great
Mind.
book. In fact, I have a pile of books that I keep around that I thumb through from time to time, and I'll have to thumb through that one a bit. I do the highlighting, the
Yeah.
underlining and starring and writing in the thing. And actually, they're teaching my 12-year-old to do this at school, and he was bitching about it the other day when I was trying to help him with his homework, and he's like, "But Dad, I know you do that too, so I'll do it." But all
Yeah.
right. On that note, Michael, the last thing we need to do in 2026, we're going to do two things. We're going to be an effective advocate for, people that are doing the work that we're doing in the city. And let's do a book club because we both like to read and we've talked about this
Love
for
it.
years. One of my old borrowers sent me a book today that and was I suggested to him that we do a book club, and he's out of the business, but a really smart guy and great guy. And so I think we'd enjoy that. But hey, listen, man, thanks for the time today. You guys see why I enjoy Michael's company so much. Also, he and his team they're wonderful architects and people. Lizzie and Matt on his team, who I know really well, are excellent at what they do, and I'm sure the rest of the team is equally talented. So thanks a lot, man. Thanks for the time. Good catching up with you, and let's have lunch soon.
Likewise.
See you,
Appreciate it.
buddy.